Awesome. Welcome. Hi, all. I'm Bailey Dickey. I lead networks here at GGV, and I'm excited to welcome you to our 6th annual Evolving Enterprise. This year, we hosted a series of masterclasses on different top-of-mind topics for CEOs and functional leaders. This is lucky number 7, the final in the series. If you haven't been able to attend any of the other masterclasses, feel free to check them out. I'll pop a link into the chat. As always, we'd like to thank Silicon Valley Bank for their continued partnership on Evolving Enterprise and for helping make this series happen. I'm really excited to turn it over to Jeff Richards to kick things off.
Good afternoon, everybody. As Bailey mentioned, this has been a fantastic series we've put on here at GGV, and I encourage you all to watch the videos if you get a chance. Some amazing sessions, and I think this will be the best. I'm biased, but I have 2 amazing guests with me today, and I'd love for you both to introduce yourself. And Emmanuelle, maybe we could start with you.
Great. Nice to meet everyone. Glad to be here. I'm Emmanuelle Skala. I'm the Senior Vice President of Customer Success at Toast. I can go any more in detail. We can hit it later.
We'll start there. Yeah.
My name is Shwetha Shankar, and I am the VP of Customer Success at Trade.io.
Awesome. And maybe, Emmanuelle, maybe this is where you were going, but maybe just give folks a sense of scale of the business and how long you've been there. And then, and we'll do the same with Shwetha at Trey. And then I want to ask you guys some questions about how your teams are organized and your roles. But let's just do a little bit about the companies.
Sure. So Toast is a public company. So you can look us up on TOST is our ticker symbol. We went public this past fall. I've been with the company for 4.5 years. And it has definitely been a wild ride. The company itself is about 10 years old from like inception, but about 7 years from go to market.
Amazing. And Shwetha, you want to tell people a little about Trey?
Yeah, sure. So Trey is a Series C startup. It's a low-code productized integration and automation platform. So, I joined to lead the customer success team at Trey a little over a year ago. CS at Trey consists of professional services. We also have a separate bespoke customer engineering organization that we treat as a ProServe function. We've got education, our customer success management function, as well as support. The team is global, so we've got folks in London, across the US, in various time zones, as well as based in Sydney. We've got 75 people in the organization today. That's more or less.
Shwetha, just to be clear, 75 people in your organization?
In the CS organization.
Yeah.
Trey itself is about 300 plus.
300, okay. And Emmanuelle, how big is Toast? Remind us, just people-wise.
So Toast is about 2,500, 3,000 employees total.
Awesome.
And my team's significant. We don't, as a public company, I have to be careful how many numbers I say. So I'll just say it's sizable.
Yeah. So maybe I'll start with Shwetha, with you, since we just kind of talked about employee size. But what did it look like when you got there, and sort of what have you done over the last 12 months? What were some of the big things you needed to tackle when you walked in? Because a lot of folks in our audience, are joining high growth companies, and in many cases, the majority of the people that I work with have only been at a company for a year because the majority of the employee base has only been there for a year. But talk a little about what that was like coming in and sort of what you focused on and what you've built over the last year.
Yeah, of course. So, when I joined Trey about a year ago, I basically arrived to a mostly reactive customer success organization. And at the time, it consisted of ProServe as well as a tier 1 and 2 support organization. So, one of the primary objectives for our team was, how do you move from a, firefighting mode to starting to think about where are the patterns that we're recognizing across the customer base, and where do we want to be really investing our efforts in order to move towards a more proactive approach to our customer success. Eventually, ultimately, our goal is to help retain as many customers as we possibly can, and really hit our net dollar retention numbers. And the objective was for us to go from our reactive mode, as it was at the time, towards starting to build the foundations towards kind of the proactive approach. So over the last year, we've effectively doubled the team in size. We grew to a follow the sun support model, which we didn't have a year ago. We introduced an education function and started to build out a lot of education assets to help our customers ramp to Tray sooner and really reduce that time to value. We're also actually currently working on introducing a CSM function, which previously, and I actually love to talk about how we went about thinking about that. I think it's very topical for us today. But we'd originally had or we still do. We had our sales team, of course, but an account management function, and the account managers were responsible and are responsible for getting the renewal and the expansion done. But we noticed that there is a big gap in the adoption phase. So unless you're adopting, you're never going to get your renewal or your expansion. And that was the onus behind introducing the CSM organization. So we're in the middle of building that out right now.
And so the team is 75 today. How many folks were there when you took over?
We were about 30 or so.
Okay, amazing. So more than doubled.
More than doubled in size.
Yeah. And how did you, maybe for folks here who are running organizations like yours, how did you spend time with Rich and the rest of the leadership team to figure out sort of like what had to get built and how you would get the reason? There's always this sort of, when a new executive joins, there's a budgeting and resourcing conversation. And how did you approach that? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so I think the way in which we approached this was in a few different ways. First of all, we already had a bit of a monetized services model, so that always helps. Oftentimes you have CSMs that might be starting off doing work to plug in the gaps that actually could be turned into monetized services. And because we had a revenue stream coming in, we were able to continue to invest in the services aspect of the business to really start to drive effectively success outcomes, but through a services model. And similarly, we had a monetized support offering, which we could use to continue to add more headcount towards our support function. In addition, using ratios or metrics that that we're aware of and that is commonly understood in the market tends to also help to add to the ROI. And lastly, on the customer success manager front, because that is a investment that we're making as a company, the ROI there was around it's effectively committing to a retention number, right, and an expansion number, and that ultimately is the outcome that we want to be driving. And if you work backwards from that, starting to look at interventions that will help us increase usage, interventions that will help us reduce our % red, yellow, green accounts, and so on and so forth, that can help us can make the case on the leading indicators of the outcomes that we want to achieve.
And I want to give folks a preview of what we're going to cover next. We're going to talk about the relationship between sales and customer success, because I know that's a big one. In fact, I had a board meeting this morning and we were talking about it. I said, you guys got to tune in this afternoon because we're going to cover this topic. But Emmanuelle, talk a little bit about when you joined Toast, what the organization looked like and sort of how you figured out what the right priorities were and built over the last few years. And by the way, I know you can't disclose it, but publicly, I noted in the most recent earnings release, Toast is north of 500 million of ARR. And 2021 net dollar retention was over 130%, which is incredible. And I think we'd all love to be there. If every one of our companies was at 130%, we'd be wildly successful as investors. So I want to get to how you helped to drive that. But what did the organization look like and what were your big priorities and how did you work with the CEO and the rest of the team to kind of make sure you got the budget and resources you needed to build?
Yes, I think that's a great question. So the organization, there was 3 teams primarily. There was an onboarding team, a account management team, and a support team. And that largely exists today too. I've added some teams over time. The first thing I added was a team that was focused on CS operations. We did not have an operations function. We didn't have a real enablement function or education function. And we didn't have a customer experience function. So like somebody's like a team, some very small teams that are looking across the whole customer journey, right? Like seeing where are there possible friction points, where are there opportunities to improve NPS. So that's what I first did, was kind of set up those new teams. And I think of those teams as force multipliers for the other teams. Like you need your onboarding, you need your CS function. We call it restaurant success now. We've changed the name since, and you need your customer care, customer support function. But we hadn't previously invested in these multipliers. And so that was the first thing I did, was kind of invest in those. And as we were scaling, it was time. I mean, frankly, maybe it was even a little late, but it was time for sure to start investing in those other teams. And then from there, the priorities sort of differed a little bit by function. In onboarding, the priority was really around efficiency. Making it more scalable. Typically what early companies do is white glove everything. It can get costly over time. And so as you scale, you have to figure out, like, what are the areas in the customer journey that we can automate? How do we focus our humans on the high value tasks and automate the low value tasks? And so spent a lot of time, like looking at efficiency and onboarding and really wanting to focus onboarders on setting customers up for success and training, and versus, like a hands-on keyboard sort of simple work that can either be automated or can be pushed to lower cost resources or can be done by the customer themselves. In the success function, very similar to Shwetha, like it was all about going from reactive to proactive. We actually, I feel like, are like just on that, like it took 4 years and it went through a lot of evolutions. We did have COVID and we had a RIF, and so things have changed, but it took a long time. But now we are like finally there, in that, like, the success team is really focused on adoption and best practices and not escalations and other things. And then the customer support team, honestly, that was just about scale. Right. We opened new centers. We were, at the time when I joined, there was just a smaller handful of people in Boston. Now we have centers in Nicaragua and Mexico and Omaha and Boston and Ireland. Wow. So that was a lot about just scale, multi-language. We have, we have a significant number of tickets a month and per week that we work on. So there was just a lot of how do we scale that function? Overall, thematically, nothing has changed dramatically. Thematically, we are still about how do we drive for the highest NPS. I can talk a lot about NPS. There's pros and cons with any sort of sentiment metric that you use. And my advice is just pick one, know that it's not perfect, but pick one because they're all probably directionally accurate. Building out that customer experience, that VOC function, allowed us to really pinpoint like where in the journey we have, areas for improvement.
And one thing I just want to double click on there, you mentioned you've got these folks all over the world. Is there a scale at which you'd recommend people think? We get a lot of companies asking us, hey, obviously less so today now that everybody's operating in a distributed mode throughout the country. But we do get into a lot of these conversations around Ireland and Argentina, and they've been operating in development teams in those areas. But on the CS side, is there a scale at which you'd recommend, like, don't even think about it until you're at this scale, or would you say, hey, earlier is better? Or do you have any advice there?
Yeah, I would say there's not a specific number. It's really when you have repeatability, right? So whenever you find that, like, the support cases that are coming in they're highly repeatable. You're seeing like a lot of trends in, then, and it's the, you still need to figure out, you still need to make sure that you have that feedback loop back to product. So you can't lose that, which is why our VOC function is here in headquarters. But what allowed us to feel comfortable opening up other offices outside of headquarters it got to a point where it was super repeatable. Wow, and we could train anyone anywhere, and it no longer required that like offline interaction with R&D. Like, well, how does this actually work? And which in the early days, having support and R&D really tight makes a lot of sense because there's product feedback loops and then there's training loops. But at some point it does become repeatable, and then you can open up other offices.
So one thing we talked about in our prep call was the relationship between sales and customer success. can both of you talk a little bit about that and how you work in tandem with the sales execs and how you think about the relationship with the customer and upsells and, take that in any direction you want. And then I'm also going to come back to Emmanuelle. You also said I would love to spend as much time with product as I can. And you just talked about onboarding and things like that. But maybe Shwetha, maybe talk a little bit about how do you interface with sales and how do you guys think about the relationship with the customer and upsells and who owns that over time and how you think about that from a compensation perspective as well? Because I know it's a thorny subject people are always wrestling with.
Yeah, of course. So, the number one thing at Trey when I arrived was really starting to get a better handle on what makes our customers successful, like what makes some customers tick and what makes some customers, just really not use the product or not be comfortable with the product. And how much of that can we solve by the appropriate customer success interventions, how much of that is a product intervention that we need to go up and solve, and how much of that is we finding the right team or the right problem to fix on the customer side. And that question is very much is something that we've got to solve for in conjunction with sales. Are we getting the right type of customer top of funnel? Are we identifying the right sort of buyer? So that and what are the expectations we want to be setting early on with the customer, so that if there is a, when they come into the post-sales side of things, they are set up to be successful eventually. Mm-hmm. And the reason why it's particularly important at Trey, I mean, it's important with any customer, but particularly so for Trey, is because Trey is a reasonably technical product. And we do need to have a reasonably technical user that will be able to kind of learn, pick up, and then continue to build and eventually become a super user of Trey. So a lot of my time was spent with the sales organization to make sure that we're honing in that right profile, and also being able to ask the appropriate questions pre-sale, so that we know the expectations that are being set pre-sale as they move into the post-sales world. You also want to make sure that things like you're setting up the account for future expansion, future use, et cetera. In terms of how, I mentioned that we have an account manager function. We're only just standing up our CSM organization. So at Trey, our account managers roll up into a different leader. And so the expansion and the expansion incentives lie with the account managers, the renewal and expansion incentives, and the AEs are purely comped on new sales. As we are thinking about introducing the CSM organization, we're kind of moving that a little bit to have CSMs be responsible for gross retention, as well as getting a kicker for net dollar retention, because they participated in that, and eventually we'd love to get to a place where we are tracking customer success generated leads within every single account, within every single opportunity, so that we can actually determine the ROI.
Is it fair to say, I always tell people, like, this subject is a never-ending work of art. Like, is that fair? I mean, you guys are at very different scale, but I would assume, Emmanuelle, this is something that changes constantly at Toast as well.
Constantly. I mean, I think, that I was going to say is don't get wedded to any model, because if you talk to any company at scale, talk to leaders at HubSpot, if you talk to leaders at Salesforce, they'll tell you they've done every single version of the possible combinations at some point in the journey. And that's okay. So like, I would not, I talked to a lot of my peers, and I'm like, oh, well, at this point in time, we did this way, and then we changed in this way, and then we went flip-flop and went back to do it this way. There really is no right or wrong answer on like who does what between sales and CS. I will say that one of the values that CS can provide is, as Shwetha mentioned, is making sure that the sales team is focused on the right ICP and providing that feedback back. Like, customers that look like this, great, sell those all day long. Customers that look like this, maybe not. So I have a sort of a very like rudimentary framework that I use with sales, which is a red light, green light, yellow light, process, which is, actually outline, okay, here's red light. Here's green light. if it looks like this all day long, go sell, just go do it, and fast as you, because we want to grab market share. If it has these characteristics, then it's a yellow light. And in that case, I like to put in like a deal desk process or a review process that just says, before we go sell it, let's just talk. Right? We're not saying no, we just think we need to talk and make sure that it makes sense. Because sometimes it does make sense to sell out of your ICP, and like helps you get into new markets. It helps you get into, like, if you're going up market or something like that. And then there's the red light, which is, don't sell customers that look like this, because they're going to fail. And we have enough evidence that says we don't have good product market fit, that it's not going to be good for the organization. So that is one of the value that CS can provide. As it relates to the age-old question about who should do what, like who should do upsells, who should do retention. I guess I'm now official lecturer at MIT before a go-to-market class in all my spare time. And I been working on a bunch of frameworks to help teach these MIT MBA students go-to-market strategies. So I'll share with you one of the frameworks that we put together for
Can you share from your screen?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just want to make sure I have the right slides. Where did it go? Hold on. Give me 1 second. I had it up, of course, right when I have it up.
The live demo.
I know. Yeah, you get a little free MBA here going on too. All right, can you guys see that?
Yeah.
Okay, so let me put it into presentation mode. All right, so from an upsell perspective, there literally is no right or wrong answer. Sales can do it, CS can do it. There's no right or wrong answer, and trust that as you scale, it will probably change 10 times. So I don't think anyone should get too attached to any model. I truly believe that there isn't a right or wrong answer. But the framework that I think through is thinking about who's your buyer, what's your value prop, what's your ACV, what's the company size you're trying to sell to, and what's your company focus. And this is a continuum. It doesn't mean it's like a black or white. It just means it's a continuum. So for example, if it's a brand new buyer, and so if one product that you sell sells into HR, but another product sells into finance, as a brand new buyer, you're more likely going to want to lean sales in that model, right? If it's the same buyer as the original purchase, or it's the same point of contact that the CSM already has, then you may want to lean towards CS doing the upsell. If the value proposition is very similar or the exact same, like more licenses of the same product, or just a slight, variation of the same value proposition, you may want to lean towards CS. If it's a completely different value proposition, then I lean towards sales. And then with ACV, it's, you can say 50%, 75%, but if it's a large ACV, if it's like almost the same value as your first deal or even more, I lean towards sales. If it is smaller ACV, then I lean towards CS. Company size also, when you're selling to enterprise, often those are land and expand deals. And so often those are going to be, the salesperson is going to stay engaged for the entire life cycle. And smaller, more SMB plays, you can have, CS can play a role in customer, in upsells. And then part of your decision-making is also the company focus. If as a company, you're really, really focused on retention because you potentially have a churn problem, then you want your CS team focused on retention and not focused on upsells. And so in that case, you would put upsells into sales. And again, if your company focus is more on growth, retention's not a problem, then maybe you can give that space to CS to think about upsells. And then renewals are similar. I don't have as much of a sliding scale motion, more just like things to consider. There's pros, and this is more like pros and cons. So like pros to having sales do renewal is they tend to be better at, sort of negotiations and conversations about money. It is hard to find CSers who can do everything post-live, adoption and best practices, and also, have commercial conversations. Some organizations just need CS focused on adoption and best practices. But there's also an argument that says that, hey, if you partner, then, you really don't have any single point of failure. which is another reason maybe to bring sales into the renewal conversation. But there are good reasons to have renewals be just CS. CS has the relationship, so they can kind of manage those like deposits and withdrawals a little bit better. CS has the clearest view of what the value that the customer is achieving from your product, and can be able to have that value-based conversation. Sometimes it's like coordinating the handoffs. If there's multiple people involved, can get complex, and sometimes removing CS from that conversation can actually lead to a poor customer experience. And then if you are having the sales team do renewals, then there is an opportunity cost of them not focusing on new business. So again, these are just sort of the things to consider when you're making that decision, but there is no right or wrong answer.
I'll also kind of add a couple things that I would say are underpin a lot of these decisions, things that you should be continuously working on. The first is keep working on reducing the friction in a renewal, right? Like you want to make sure that your contract terms are as simple and straightforward as possible. Try to reduce the degree to which you actually need to do complex negotiation in a renewal. And the second, of course, is, build enough telemetry to know and understand what usage looks like, and the customer and you have the same understanding of how they're using the product and where they may be exceeding entitlements, et cetera, to help make that expansion conversation, the upsell conversation, just that much more straightforward.
I love the idea of making it easy to sort of upsell, upgrade. One of the things we always talk about with sales teams is make your product not only easy to sell, but easy to buy. Are you a company that's easy to buy from? It's amazing how many early stage companies are hard to buy from, partially because they don't really understand the buy side equation and what they have to deal with in terms of procurement or IT or security. So love that idea of making it easy to upgrade. Talk a little about the interface with product. I know that's a really important relationship for both of you as well. And Shwetha, maybe we could start with you.
Yeah, of course. I think during prep, both Emmanuelle and I aligned on how the product relationship is really crucial for us in CS. At Tray, both our product and CS teams have several common goals. Our goals include increasing the number of super users that use Tray. It's around reducing time to value across various different customer segments. We have the same retention goals. And so ultimately, this is how CS and product should work hand in hand, right? It's our jobs in CS to ensure that our customers' voice is heard by our product teams, and it's the product teams' responsibility to really want to see their product being adopted, used. They want to conduct user research, closely track product data, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of our kind of goal, our goal here with working with product is around, making sure we have enough information to track product usage, make sure we are tracking product adoption trends alongside each other in various different features. I think we lost Jeff, didn't we?
We did lose Jeff.
All right. Okay.
You can keep going then.
Yeah, I'll keep going. Yeah.
I'm sure he'll jump right back on.
Yeah, exactly. All right. I also think, what sort of the other piece where we collaborate is, what sort of education or UI improvements are needed to kind of really aim for that faster time to value. So, we work in concert to build that telemetry, to do that customer usage tracking. We collect feedback about how customers are experiencing the product, and also expose tutorials within our product and templates within our product so we can ramp customers.
Yeah, I think the relationship between CS and product is probably the most important relationship in the company. And it has to be at two levels. It has to be at the in the moment, in the trenches level, and then it has to be in the more sort of strategic voice of customer level. So the in the moment, in the trenches level is really important, especially at scale, right? Because the first people to identify an issue or a bug or a bad release or something is going to be either your customers or your support team. And so you have to have an immediate, process to engage with engineering, in the moment, right when there's either an incident or something's happening. And so we actually have in our support team, we have what we call a support engineering function that sits within support. That is that connection back to the R&D team, and very in the moment. They also provide more strategic voice of customer feedback back to engineering, but it's mostly designed to like say, okay, wait, we're seeing trends in our ticket. So we're seeing trends and things that customers are talking about, and let's get together and let's start to solve those. But then there's the more strategic, voice of customer. And I think that is, it's pretty critical that every organization has one, because that feedback back to product on what's working, what's not working, what customers love about the product, what they don't love about the product, how can we improve the experience, is pretty critical. And what we've done at Toast is we didn't have this right away, but I think it started maybe a couple of years ago. Now we have a team, an R&D, a Scrum team in R&D that is just focused on addressing the feature requests or the bug fixes that we identify. So they're pretty much dedicated to CS. And the leader of that team actually sits, even though is solid lined into product, actually sits on my leadership team. And so, is fully embedded, goes to my offsites, comes to my weekly staff meetings, fully embedded in everything we do. I do think that if you're staying true to, we really care about customers and customer success is really important, then you have to make sure that you put your money where your mouth is by having at least some part of your engineering and R&D team, extremely focused on existing customers and not just building capabilities for the next customer or for the feedback from from sales, and also really focus on the feedback from existing customers. Now we have to make up our own questions.
I'll jump in here. Jeff should be back momentarily. I think he had a full Mac meltdown, but he'll be back in 2 minutes. But I did want to maybe continue on and ask both of you to share a little bit about some of your key metrics and benchmarking for your organizations. Shwetha, I don't know if you want to maybe take that one away.
Yeah, sure. Ultimately, we want to measure the success of the customer success function by our GRR numbers and our R numbers. That's always going to be king. But we certainly have many leading indicators that we want to be tracking as we find our way to that NRR number, right? Like those numbers are always going to be lagging indicators, and you're never going to know how you're performing until 12 months is up, pretty much. So the metrics that we track, our account health metric is extremely important to us. So we've actually crafted a metric based on our clear understanding of product usage and how product usage translates to likelihood to renew. So we have a pretty solid model built in, and the way we operationalize that is by having regular account review syncs where we're going through the list, identifying what some of the patterns are, how do we tackle some of the immediate renewals coming up, and how do we tackle the long tail where, that might be feedback to product, it might be an ICP question, it may be other interventions that we need to put in place. Second metric, to Emmanuelle's point, voice of customer is really, really key. We track NPS as well and CSAT at the customer support level. I am a huge believer in NPS. I used to work at Medallia, which is a customer experience company. And so I agree, ultimately it doesn't matter what metric you have. The important thing is you are tracking it and you're tracking it comprehensively. So you're not just asking, your immediate users for their feedback, but you're hitting up your influencers on the customer side. You are contacting your decision maker, et cetera, et cetera. And so a comprehensive VOC program is really, really crucial. And then being able to tie it back to the results or being able to tie it back to root causes that you can then share with your with the organization and really affect change, I think is also really crucial for us. Ultimately the last thing I would say is, of course we want to track usage metrics, not just on the product side, but also, are our customers using our education assets? Are we doing a good job with a bunch of efficiency metrics? And that could be margin on the PS side or utilization. It could be kind of cost per ticket on the support side, but simple metrics like that can start to really help you track how much better you are at growing at scale, and maintaining the efficiency that you want to see in the organization.
Yeah, we track a ton of metrics, and they do vary by department a little bit within CS. But overall, I put our metrics into, or any CS team's metrics really, just not Toast, but anything, into 4 categories. So there's metrics that are around customer sentiment, NPS, CSAT, and whatever else you may use for all your customer sentiment metrics. We have a bunch. Then there are your revenue related metrics, and the North Star for many CS teams is net dollar retention, right? As a revenue related metric, but it could be churn, it could be upsell, whatever you'd like it to be. But you have your sentiment metrics, your revenue metrics, you have your product usage metrics, which are, as Shwetha already said, it could be, if once you identify that, the customers are successful when they've used the product in this way, then you're going to start to track and say, okay, how many of our customers have gotten to that point, and what's the time to value? Are they using our content, or are they using our product in the way that we would want to? Then we've come up with, adoption scores, essentially. So we score customers in our health metrics around how well they're adopting the products. And then the 4th category is like your operational metrics. So those can be like in your customer care department, they can be things like your SLAs, right? Your answer time, right? Or in onboarding, it can be your time to go live. And so there's a lot of operational metrics, or at whatever SLAs that you may have in any department, right? It could be like time to response or whatever those are. So I put it into those 4 buckets: sentiment, product usage, revenue metrics, and then operational, more activity-based metrics.
Awesome. We're going to keep rocking and rolling because I think Jeff's internet's also down right now.
Wow.
But I know we had a lot of questions from the audience that were submitted before around tools, systems, software, what that looks like as you scale and how those change. I don't know if either of you can shed some light on kind of, you're in different size organizations, what works, what doesn't, when do things break, and if there's anything specific around there you can share.
Yeah, I can go for it. I think the scaling question would actually be very interesting for Emmanuelle to answer, because as the organization grows at Toast, I'm sure she's seen a lot of change on that front. I find though that the best tools that you have are the tools that your teams use. So, you might have the best customer success platform in the world, but if you don't have the operations in place to actually use it, it's never going to get used. So so I've tried to kind of minimize the number of tools that we're using at any moment in time, but really focusing on ensuring that if we're going to introduce a new tool, do we have the appropriate buy-in, and do we have the actual need from the team to use them? So we use we of course use, at this point, we use Salesforce to track our account health. We haven't necessarily kind of gone too far down ACS platform investment. I will say actually, and this might be a shameless plug, we've been able to do a lot of our integrations and they work really perfectly on Tray. So we haven't necessarily needed to introduce too many new systems. Instead, we just make the integrations work within the systems that we currently have. We have a voice of customer platform that we use. And we have a project management tool that we use, which actually ends up being a great repository of a shared repository of customer documents and things like that we make customer facing. We have a support tool. We use Zendesk, and Zendesk works perfectly fine for us. In fact, we're actually going to be, as we're rolling out a bit of a scale success model, we'll continue to want to use Zendesk to be kind of a pooled ticketing approach for managing our scale success team. So more to come on all of that. But at this point, I think this is my MO is, don't make the investment until it's very clear that there will be adoption, and there's only going to be adoption when the team is genuinely clamoring for a new and improved version of what you're doing.
It's very similar. Salesforce is sort of the foundation for everything. We also don't have like a dedicated CS tool. We've sort of built out Salesforce to do a lot of that. For onboarding, we do have a project management, capabilities with a third party. We also have since we use we have employees in the field, and we also have partners that we use as part of our onboarding and professional services. We have a partner portal, a way to manage service appointments and field appointments across all of our field employees as well as our partners. And we have the classic in support. You have your ticketing tool and your phone system and your QA system and your workforce management system and a voice of customer tool, a feedback. We have an online community for our customers. We have our feature request tool. I think more important than the specific tools that you use, I think that where I would advise, what most companies don't focus on enough until later or too late, I think, in their life cycle. Trey obviously did this really early, so it's exciting to see that, but is orchestrating all that customer usage data or that product usage data. It's not easy to do if you wait too long to do it. And there are tons of tools on the market to be able to make sure that you are really capturing how your customers are using your products. And that is just gold for both product management as well as for CS. And the more we understand how our products are being used, the more personalized we can be with our outreach. And we're no longer sending like, hey, are you using this? And like to everybody and spamming everyone, because that's just not really relevant, but we can be super, super relevant and say, we noticed, in our data, we noticed you're doing X, Y, and Z. I built these systems at other companies previous to Toast and at Toast, but being able to have that personalized conversation with a customer is just gold. You're going to be able to create a relationship that where a customer really feels heard when you can call them and say, we notice X, Y, Z, and I'm here to help. So that would be the area I would say every CS team should be focused on, making sure that you have that up front. Welcome back, Jeff.
Yeah, the internet is fun. I don't think my internet's gone down in a few months, and it just happens to go out at 1:30 p.m. on the day I'm doing a webinar. But now you can all see my fantastic green screen that I use behind me. I ordered this on the 1st of March in 2020, right when COVID hit, and it's survived all the way through to this day. So $10 on Amazon, highly recommend. What did I miss?
Oh, we did great without you.
You don't need me. I'm the least important. I'm the least important part of this conversation. So you definitely don't need me. I was going to check in and see if anybody had put any questions in the chat, but I don't think my chat history shows up. Bailey, I don't know if you see anything.
One that was for Shwetha about product.
Yeah, I would say we're working on it. Is probably the answer to that question. We are finding a lot of success in trial motion, so that's something that we're going to be continuing to double down on.
One thing that I've seen on product led, one thing I've seen across multiple companies is if you're new to product led, if it wasn't part of your original go to market motion. Try it on existing customers first for upsells and for additional purchases. And not because you want them to be your guinea pigs, but existing customers are going to much more likely want to engage with you in that way, especially for transactional type purchases. We had a lot of success doing that in multiple companies I've been involved with.
What maybe you guys chatted about this while I was gone, but I know I asked you this when we chatted. What are some of the biggest mistakes? I know you both advise other companies and certainly have a strong community of people in the customer success world of folks that you talk to. What are some of the common mistakes you see companies make as they're scaling this area? You mentioned one, which is companies start late. I think that it's a mistake, but it's also pretty common. I mean, almost every company I've ever worked with, very rarely are people too early on customer success. But what are some of the mistakes or lessons learned you would share with folks here to say, man, if you can think about this and get this right early, or bring this up with the exec team early on, it'll really save you a lot of time down the road?
I would say the one that I see the most often is not focusing on customer outcomes, and not being really crystal clear around like what are the outcomes you want customers to have at when in the customer journey do you want them to have those outcomes, and then be pretty maniacally focused on are they achieving those outcomes, and if they're not, then how can you orchestrate the product or the journey in a way that that drives that, not just time to value, because time to value is pretty critical in a world where frankly, buyers have control and there's a lot of choice, and they can drop your product, at any time and probably pick up a competitor pretty quickly. So time to value, and then, and are they achieving the outcomes that they, because there was a reason why they bought, right? There was something that there was an outcome that they wanted. And companies don't connect it. Surprisingly, companies don't connect the dots as from like what they told the salesperson, the reason why they bought, and then, how we're managing them to that milestone. It seems so obvious, but it is alarming how many companies actually don't follow through on that.
Or oftentimes the people who bought are no longer there. Right. And so doing that like check-in of like, you just assume they're going to upgrade and renew. And it's like, hey, this is why the team bought. Is it successful for you? Are you achieving the outcomes you want to achieve? Because we measure NPS, we do all this benchmarking, we look at it, net dollar retention, and then, sometimes in that dinner, I've been a lot of dinners with customers where they were like, well, it does this, but we really haven't done what we thought it was going to do. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. All these other things we're measuring don't matter if what you bought isn't really delivering for you. Exactly. That's a great one.
It's like flipping the switch, and instead of having all of your discussions, be internal metrics that your customers don't care about. Like customers don't care about NDR, customers don't care about churn rates. Customers don't care about any of that, right? And so flipping the switch and the script, and so like, right, what are the things that customers care about, and how do you get that into your organization? The second thing I would say is, I see companies fall in the traps of making customer success a function of the customer success team. And the reality is churn is usually not a CS problem. 9 times out of 10, it's either a product problem or a sales problem. So like CS shouldn't be used as a way to just hide, systemic problems in the way you either sell or go to market or your product. Everybody in the company should own metrics that are tied to, customer satisfaction or customers meeting their outcomes.
Love that. How about you, Shwetha?
I will kind of +1 everything Emmanuelle said, 100% accurate. I also find that sometimes it's kind of the tactical steps you have to put in place to it's as simple as making sure that every customer gets a call once a month or once a quarter, depending on the size of the deal. Making sure that you have a process in place where you're sitting down together with your organization and identifying which customers are red, yellow, green. Why are they red, yellow, green? What is the reason behind that? And let's go off and fix those things. It's a discipline that you need to put in place as a customer success organization. You are the stewards and you are the representation of the customer to your organization. But to Emmanuelle's point, it's the job of every single person at the company to aim for customer success. And so actually just getting down to that tactical level, tracking things like, are customers getting outreaches? Are you talking about the health of customers on a regular basis? If a customer gives you feedback, are you responding to them? Those sorts of kind of interventions, I think, will help you really generate a customer-centric culture within an organization.
Here's a great question from Kendall, and you guys can read it in the chat as well, but it says, how do you sell end users on the value of the product? We still see instances where the buyers, decision makers are hyped, but they fail to propagate that excitement down the chain to end users, and or they aren't great at change management. You've probably never seen this before. I'm kidding.
That happens pretty frequently.
Yeah.
Shwetha, do you want to go for it?
Actually, this is I'll maybe go back to my experiences at Medallia, because at Medallia, our kind of end user population was pretty massive, right? So Medallia is a customer experience management platform, and we used to sell to mostly kind of Fortune 2000 companies. So you're talking about end users that are frontline users across large contact center deployments, a large hotel staff user population, et cetera, et cetera. And the degree to which we had to work with customers on ensuring that they had a change management plan in place was basically about as extensive as organizing the project itself with them. And so we developed a change management course for our customers. We put in place, as part of our deployments, we had a project manager who would work with our customers to sort out what change management looked like. And ultimately, when a decision maker puts their neck on the line to buy your products, they also want it to be widely successful, right? And they don't want to, especially if they're spending several hundreds of thousands or millions in Medallia's case. So they will kind of work with you on that change management process. I find, I'm sure you've all kind of experienced that you need to say the same thing 7 different ways before it really kind of filters in. And so we would structure the change management process to actually map to that.
The only thing I would add to that is everything she said, but I would also add that onboarding, whoever does onboarding, is whether it's product led or self-service onboarding, or whether it's done by CSMs or a separate onboarding team, is the perfect place to insert this. And make sure onboarding isn't just check the boxes, do the configuration, get them like technically set up, but you really want to make sure onboarding has some of the same like value proposition training that sales does. Because often what will happen, especially if you're selling a suite of solutions, is that like you may have to resell the value of the whole suite over and over and over again. And so I would suggest that onboarding is a place where you can very purposely, and in your training content, you can very purposely not have your training content, not have your onboarding just be about how-tos, but also have it be about value proposition. That helps significantly, because that's usually the time when you first start to engage with those end users.
Mm-hmm. Kendall says, thank you.
You're welcome.
I don't know what I missed, so I don't want to repeat any questions.
We hit all the questions on our.
Awesome. Well, you guys are great. I guess anything we didn't cover that you'd share with folks, or any trends in the industry that you're seeing that you're kind of excited about, or doing more research on, or learning more on, just any resources you'd point people to where they can learn more? Just curious, as we've only got about 5 minutes left.
There was a question around.
Aaron said, how did you build out your ratios, and how often do you revisit them?
I can go first, actually, because we are in the middle of doing exactly this exercise right now. So we haven't yet had a chance to revisit, but the approach that we took was, I want to go back to something that Emmanuelle said, which is you really want to look at the customer journey from the perspective of the customer. It's not about when you are engaging; it's about what the customer needs from you during their journey with you. And so what we did was define what we thought a great journey would look like for different types of customer tiers and customer segments, and we essentially did a bottoms up analysis of going, okay, what sort of interventions do we want to put in place for different customer sizes, for different customer products that they may have purchased, and how do we then define that out to be the number of FTE that we would need to deliver on those interventions. We also kind of definitely did a look at that, and how much of this could we really offer as a high value consulting service, so we can actually think about monetizing some of those, and how much of this would be interventions that will help us actually set the customer up for more usage, and as a result make that investment and then look to reap the rewards in greater expansion. So in that model, when we did the bottoms up approach, we identified kind of a different set of ratios for our pooled model, or kind of our commercial accounts ratios, which are obviously a lot higher per CSM, through to our larger customers that we want to be increasing. We'll obviously have fewer customers per CSM. Ultimately, there is the golden rule, right, of 2 million per CSM that you often might want to start with. But I find that is a good kind of starting point. But I think a bit of a ground up analysis will help you make sure that you're not overextending your CSM team the instant they start and already setting them up for failure.
Yeah, I would agree. I think and this also goes to your question, Jeff, earlier around things that I see companies not do or not invest in. Having a bottoms up capacity model is critical, right? And and getting really into like what how long do these tasks actually take, right? That they're doing is pretty critical. And we call it level of effort, right? What is the level of effort to do all the things that they're going to do? Stack that up. That dictates your capacity model versus necessarily some revenue number. Maybe completely arbitrary and different from company to company. So I have a capacity model that's extremely detailed for onboarding. That's very different than the one that's for restaurant success, which is different than the one for customer care. And then the second part of the question, I would say you want to revisit those. You want to look at the inputs to those models at minimum every month, right? And then if there's major swings in some of the assumptions that you made, or because remember, hopefully over time you're looking at that and you're using that not only to determine how many people you need, but you're also using that to determine whether there's opportunity for streamlining or automation or other things. And so as you automate one task, then you may need to rejig your capacity model again. So, I would say it's one of those, it's a monthly thing. Now, depending on your budget cycle, you may not be able to actually make changes every month, but at least you're completely aware of if you're on track or not from your headcount perspective.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Well, we could spend all day here, but I know you don't have all day to spend with us, and our audience would probably not stick around all day either. But there's so many topics to probe here, and we were talking about this. A group of us investors were talking about how this function has become so important as every company, it sort of started with the shift from on-prem to SaaS, more in the cloud, but it just feels like, the level of focus in this area has ratcheted up for 10 straight years. And I don't see it, even in like where you play, Emmanuelle, in the SMB segment, being able to collaborate with users and customers who aren't as tech savvy as large enterprise customers. I mean, there's just so many layers to this onion that are going to keep getting peeled over the next few years. It's a pretty exciting area. And the companies that do it well, you can tell, right? I mean, how many companies 5 years ago, public companies, didn't disclose net dollar retention? Now it's become a staple that smart investors have learned to look for. And a big reason for that is the CS function. So thank you both. We appreciate it. We appreciate all you do to help others in our community. And thanks for taking the time today.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.